You are listening to the CMQ Investing podcast. My name is Chris Franco, and we are going to talk about some questions that I've been receiving. A lot of questions actually have been about the same thing, and that is about what is going on right now with Ukraine, with Russia, and how that's affecting the markets. What should you do? Before I get into this, though, let me just first start off by saying this is not meant to be, this is not a political podcast. I'm also not one of these people that looks to, I'm not interested in trying to exploit macro events, especially something like this. What I want to say first and foremost, before I get into a little bit more of a heartfelt comment, is stay the course. Don't do anything stupid. Don't make any big moves. Don't try to outsmart the situation and do something in your portfolio. Just keep your head on your shoulders. Keep your head on your shoulders. Does that even make sense? Don't let Mr. Market convince you that you need to do something that you don't need to do. You know, one of the biggest mistakes that investors have been making for probably centuries is frequent trading. And oftentimes it's a result of thinking you can outsmart the markets, or that you have some sort of a, special ability to predict the future that you don't have. And it happens to even the greatest investors. So and I'll have some quotes from Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett in a little bit about that, and actually specifically related to Russia. So I did as always, I did my homework for this episode. But what I would want to say before we get into that is just, as I said, this is not a political podcast. I'm not doing this for, virtue signaling or whatever the terminology is. Genuinely just want to say my heart goes out to anyone who's being affected by this, whether it's people who are directly affected or people who have family that's being affected. It's obviously a very unfortunate thing. And, I don't have anything new to add. They sound like Charlie Munger, nothing to add here. That hasn't been already said. So I just want to acknowledge that I am, very much, my heart goes out to anyone affected by this. I also think it's important to acknowledge that this is not everyone in Russia versus everyone in Ukraine or something like that. There's many people in Russia who don't support this. This is, I can say as an American, there's been wars where, I'm sure from how it's perceived globally, it might seem like it's America versus, but, it's a very divisive issue, and it's unfortunate this is happening. And as I said, genuinely sincere, I was going to say, I feel like I'm starting to become like one of those corny tweets, like thoughts and prayers. I'm not trying to be that guy. Just genuinely, I don't want to do this and just be all about like, how can we make some money off this? That's not what this is about. So with that said, I want to talk a little bit about not just what's going on, because obviously the markets are going crazy. So again, I just want to remind all of us just to stay calm, relax, don't do anything you don't have to do. This is something that happens. And I have some quotes from Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger to help us, internalize this idea and hopefully help all of us avoid making, just decisions, like I said, we don't need to make. So let me start off with a couple quotes, and then I'll get into the comments. I see there's a lot of comments. I'm on Instagram Live right now through Charlie Munger quotes. But I pulled together some quotes here. The first, actually, this is just not trying to, look, Charlie Munger is somewhat of a Nostradamus type. At the Daily Journal meeting, what was that, last week or the week before? This was before the conflict obviously had started up. But there was a question about investing in China. I think you know what his answer was, but a part of that it might have gone over everyone's head, or it just wasn't as relevant at the time. He said that he's comfortable investing in China, but he empathized with the person asking the question because he said, and I quote, "I'm sympathetic to the question asker. If he's nervous, he doesn't have to join us," meaning join us in investing in China. Charlie continued by saying that he feels about Russia the way that the guy or the gentleman asking the question feels about China. Charlie said, and I quote directly here, "I don't invest in Russia, so I can't criticize his point of view." It makes him uneasy. And I think you're seeing something right now that I've never seen before, which is where, Russia's economy is just completely tanking. I read a Financial Times article this morning that said that the Russian, like the equivalent of the central bank, raised interest rates to 20% to try to offset, the damage of the sanctions. And it's a messy situation, and it's probably going to have ripple effects in the economy. But as an investor myself, and this is something that always resonated with me, but when I first heard Charlie and Warren say it, it just clicked in a different way, which is, I don't try to make money off macro predictions. I don't have any advantage doing that. No one really does. I think it's all kind of in our heads. For me, it's, I think as a CMQ investor, where the foundational idea here is that, wealth is created through compounding over a long period of time. It's all about the long term. I don't have any advantage in the short term over, high frequency traders and algorithms. I don't have any unique insight in the geopolitical landscape that someone else, doesn't have. I have no advantage. And so there's just no way for me it just doesn't make sense for me to try to predict macro events and make investments that way. And I think it's a reminder to all of us, it's all about the business. That's what we're trying to do. It's all about the businesses. Your portfolio, it's about what are the businesses that you have pieces of. Our last episode of the podcast, I read live the new Berkshire Hathaway annual letter to shareholders from Warren Buffett. And, that I recommend reading that or listening to that episode because, again, Warren Buffett emphasizes the same point, which is it's all about businesses. He says, we're not stock pickers, we're business pickers. So speaking of Warren Buffett, I went through my database and I wanted to see what Warren Buffett had said in the past about Russia. Now, I'm sure there's other things he said. This is specifically from the Q&As at the Berkshire meetings over the years. I have a quote here from 2006, which I want to read to you. I don't have all the context of it, but just what he says here is very relevant. And hopefully I don't butcher this because I'm doing this live, but he says, his first was like an experience in Russia. He says, and again, you know how Warren Buffett talks. These transcripts have a lot of, there'll be a little bumpy while I'm reading it, but he says, Charlie and I inherited a business at Solomon that was in the oil business big time out in Siberia. And there came a time when we got to dig the holes. We sent the money in, and as long as we were drilling, we were welcome. And then when we wanted to start taking the oil out, after our money had been used to drill the holes, they weren't quite as friendly. In fact, it was really kind of extreme what took place with us. So having had a few experiences like that, it might take us quite a while before we sink a lot of money into Russia. It may be different now, but I don't think it's any certainty. I had breakfast in Sun Valley 3 years ago this July. I believe it was with Mikhail Khodorkovsky. I'm terrible at these names, guys. You can clearly tell I'm not fit to do any sort of like geopolitical international content. I always butcher these names. He says we had a translator, and the gentleman talked to him about whether he was thinking about listing Yukos. He says he talked to me about whether he should list the Yukos on the New York Stock Exchange, but he said it would require registering with the SEC, and he wasn't sure whether that would be too dangerous. Well, I don't think he listed it there, but he went back to Russia, and he's been in jail now for, well, just about ever since. And that was 2006. If you're just joining us, we're talking about what's the conflict going on with Ukraine and Russia and the markets, and just, making sure we're all staying rational, we're not overreacting to it, and that we're just, staying the course and being sensible and rational. Right now, I have a couple other quotes. This is another response from Warren Buffett at one of the Berkshire Q&As from back in the day. And here he says, and this is another good reminder for what I'm talking about. He says, I'd say that and this is Warren Buffett, by the way, I'd say that at any given point in history, including when stocks were their cheapest, you could find an equally impressive number of negative factors. I mean, you could have sat down in 1974 when stocks were screaming bargains, and you could have written down all kinds of things that would have caused you to say, the future is just going to be terrible. And similarly, at the top, anytime you can write down a large list of things that would be quite on the bullish side. We really don't pay attention to that sort of thing. I mean, you might say that's our underlying premise, and I think it's a pretty sound underlying premise. And it's that this country will do very well, and particularly, it will do well for business. Business has done very well. The Dow went from 66 to 10,000 plus in the 100 years of the 20th century. And we had 2 world wars, nuclear bombs, flu epidemics, you name it, Cold War. There's always problems in the future. There are always opportunities in the future. And in this country, the opportunities have won out over the problems over time. And I think they will continue to do so, absent weapons of mass destruction, which is another question. And business won't make much difference if anything really drastic happens along that line. Well, that's true. He says, I can't remember any discussion that Charlie and I have had ever, going all the way back to 1959, where we came to the conclusion at the end of those conversations that we would have passed on a great business opportunity, an opportunity to buy a business, and to not do it because of external conditions. So again, Warren Buffett, just direct quote. It's not, I probably could say it. Let me just say what I would have said if I was re-saying this. He says, him and Charlie they've never passed on a great business because of outside factors. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the business. Business. Macro factors, world wars, crazy, pandemics. We're living through it right now, in this new century. We're in the 21st century now. So, look at Warren Buffett as a historian of the last century. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And that doesn't mean that this makes the conflict right now any easier to swallow or any, like anyone should be less nervous or less vigilant. But it's a reminder for all of us as CMQ investors that what we want to do is just keep the big picture in mind, focus on your strategy, be long-term oriented, and stay centered and focused on businesses. That is what this game is all about. It's not about predicting what's going to happen, in an international conflict. People that think they can do that are fooling themselves, and in all likelihood, probably unintentionally or intentionally fooling others. So I just don't waste time with it. As I said, my heart goes out to anyone who's being affected by what's going on right now, obviously. And I say that separate of this, other point that I'm making here. But it's, unfortunately, this is the world we live in. This is reality. Charlie Munger has a great quote, which is that, reality is talking to anyone who will listen. And it doesn't mean that, like I said, that this makes it any easier to swallow something like this. But, I wish I had more insight on how, we could do something to make this better. But as far as what we can do as investors and what we can control our temperament, we can control our own psychology, we can control our emotions, or at least try to. If you're having trouble doing that, I recommend writing out a plan. Write out what it is you're actually trying to achieve as an investor, and be specific. Write a measurable goal. If it's maybe like an annualized return, an average rate of return you're trying to achieve over a 20 or 30 year period, write that down. Keep it in front of you. Put a Post-it on your laptop or something like that. And when you're thinking about, I got to sell this or I got to do this, ask yourself if it would be a good decision in 30 years from now. If you'll look back and say, well, I'm glad I did that. And I think based on the history, based on the statistics, based on everything I've read, it almost never works out well for us when we try to play that game. So I just want to encourage all of us to not try to play that game and just, be sensible, be rational. And, if you need some help, go over to the Charlie Munger quotes page on Instagram. I've got 500 something quotes up there that I've probably more than that, actually. Because a lot of them are carousels now. But, read through them. It helps. I do it all the time. I didn't create that page just to get followers. It's those quotes have helped me a lot. And it's really easy to lose sight of the rationality and the logic and just the good sense that is being, I'm trying to talk too smart right now. I wish I could talk. I'm more of a Warren Buffett talker, right? Like I'm like, bop, 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 bop. I wish I could just, if I was Charlie Munger, like a Charlie Munger podcast would be like 45 seconds. It'd be like, you're listening to the CMQ Investing podcast. This is Charlie Munger and this silence. Everyone would be like, oh, wow, 5 stars. Let me write a review. I wouldn't even have to do call to actions. I'd just look at the camera, like if I was on YouTube. By the way, CMQ Investing, there's a YouTube channel, youtube.com/CMQ Investing. You'll see my stupid face. But if you like this content, you'll like the YouTube a lot. I'm going to try to add more there, as well as, of course, the podcast. This has been the CMQ Investing Podcast. Please make sure you follow on Apple and Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a written review because it goes a long way in helping more people discover this content. By the way, speaking of discovering this content, what I just discovered is when my dog comes up to me and starts wagging, you can hear it through this microphone because this microphone is so good that you can even hear my thoughts sometimes. Okay. All right, guys. Really do appreciate you listening. Thank you again. My name is Chris Franco. We'll talk soon.